everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared, and on this channel, every day that goes by, things just get crazier and crazier, and this is the latest entry. So we're talking about Benjamin Netanyahu, right? You'll remember that he's recently come back to power, and I don't fully know what the implications of that are, but it looks like more light has been shed on that today as I've gathered together these different stories. I should have pulled this up, but let's just do a quick review of what happened. Okay, list of Israeli prime ministers. It's been a while since I've talked about politics or the leadership in Israel, but it was kind of a big deal recently when basically Benjamin Netanyahu had been ousted from his seat in government, his office, by this weird coalition that came together of different political parties where their plan was they just wanted him out of office. And so basically they had one guy, Naftali Bennett, and then another guy, Yair Lapid, which would take turns as prime minister. So like imagine obviously their government is different from the United States and other governments too. Imagine that we had elections, like the elections coming up, right, with Joe Biden and whoever else becomes his main opponent. Imagine that a bunch of people just wanted him out of office, and so the Republican Party teamed up with like the Libertarians or something like that, and then they made an agreement. Okay, first we're going to have this person be president for the first 2 years, and then for the next 2 years it'll be the Libertarian guy. You know, something like that. That's what happened. That's what they did, because in Israel you can do that. So that's what happened. But you know, they weren't able to maintain power. Things were not really working out. If I remember right, it's been a while. They had a hard time getting any laws passed, really. It just, I guess it was just kind of a disaster. So what happened was, well, Benjamin Netanyahu came back. He came back. Here he is. Now, what's interesting about Benjamin Netanyahu is, well, no, I'm going to go over a whole bunch of things that are interesting about Benjamin Netanyahu. But the reason why I'm making this video is because I came across this article right here. This will kind of set the stage. Netanyahu's judicial reform threatens to bulldoze the Declaration of Independence. Okay, what? Okay. Having easily secured initial approval for a central element of its move to neuter the High Court, the coalition is now on a collision course for Israel's foundational principles. I'm guessing that the High Court is their equivalent of the Supreme Court. So imagine if we were talking about the United States and neutering the Supreme Court. Maybe that'll help you understand what's being said here. And I'm not necessarily taking a side per se, but let's just continue. Barely 7 weeks, interesting number, barely 7 weeks after the coalition was sworn in, it easily secured Knesset, which is their, Congress, approval overnight Monday, Tuesday for the first reading of a law that would grant it near absolute power over all three branches of Israel's governance. Okay, you see what's happening here? I don't know how serious to take this, but there's a lot of people that are upset, and feathers are being, ruffled. But there's more. Okay, like why do we care about this? Like who cares? It's Israel. Like whatever. Well, obviously we know that the modern nation state of Israel, is important prophetically, and the things that they choose to do could affect or lead to prophecy being fulfilled, right? Prophecy being fulfilled. A lot of times we think about the Temple Mount and the status of the Temple Mount and how the Jews want to build the third temple on top of the Temple Mount. The only problem with that is that the Muslims claim it as their own. And even worse than that, the temple is supposed to go right where the Dome of the Rock is. So how's that going to change? Well, let me just say, for one, I've been studying this for a while, and it doesn't seem like the church has a very solid position about what that temple is supposed to look like, if it's even going to be on the Temple Mount. We've talked about the BYU Jerusalem Center. Please spare me the comments. Go watch my playlist. I have many, many videos about the BYU Jerusalem Center, all the miracles, all the things that went into making that a reality. Okay. But I still kind of feel like there probably will at some point be a third temple the way that the Jews expect. One that is fashioned after the previous temples that were there, the first and second temples, uh, most likely using the specifications from the book of Ezekiel, I would imagine. And but so how does it happen? If you're like a Jewish person, if you're an Israeli, well, some of them think that the temple's going to come out of heaven. Like when I talked to Rabbi Gerfine, he says that's one of the prevailing ideas, is that it's not going to be the Jews that build it, but it's going to come down out of heaven. And he even told his friend that lives right over there by the Temple Mount, hey, you should like have a camera, mount a security camera or something, have it recording 24/7, because when the temple comes down, then you'll capture it. You have like the best seat, you have front row seats. Other people believe that they need to build it, and that's why we have the Temple Institute, Temple Institute, where they have actually built everything necessary for the temple. If you go to study tools, you go to vessels, go down to gallery, they've made all the instruments, everything that they need to do temple service according to Mosaic law. It's all here, okay? Including the Ark of the Covenant. I think a lot of people are under the impression uh, that Jews, need the original Ark of the Covenant, but it doesn't seem like that's the case, or at least not in the opinion of the Temple Institute. They've built it. Here it is. Okay, so everything's ready to go. They have red heifers. Not every now. There's a really interesting video that you should watch. Let's see. What is it? My Israel. I just recommended this recently. My Israel channel. Something like that. You should watch this video right here. Let's see. Go to videos. It's called "I Asked Jewish People What They Thought About the Third Temple," and he just went around, asked a bunch of people on the street, like, "What do you think about the Third Temple? Are you aware of the Temple Institute?" And there's a lot of people that are not, actually. There's a lot of Jews that don't even know that the Temple Institute exists, and they have different ideas of how it's supposed to happen. Some people believe, well, the whole idea of the final redemption is that it's going to bring about peace. So it's not a matter of like tearing down the Dome of the Rock. It's just going to naturally happen because the world's going to become unified. The Messiah is going to be able to unify the world, and it's going to be done in a peaceful way. Other people think that it's going to happen other ways. Like I said, having it come down from heaven, or taking it in a militant way. So there's different opinions in Judaism, but the Temple Institute is prepared. They are prepared for it to happen. They have everything. They have an altar ready, like an altar that can be transported to the Temple Mount as soon as they get the green light. So there's all different types of things. Okay. So again, back to Benjamin Netanyahu. Who is he? Who supports him? What are the implications of this? Well, let's look at some interesting stuff about Benjamin Netanyahu. First, let's look at let's do the exciting stuff first. Okay. You may have heard this before. Now, this is on Israel 365, but it's also reported by 7 Israel National News. Okay. But I'm going to go with the Israel 365 article. Excuse me. Netanyahu holding the keys for Messiah. Wow. What a title for an article. This is written by Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz. And this is what it says. Okay, now this is an old article. This is from 2018, which is interesting. Again, this was 2018 was the first year of President Nelson's presidency. A rift in the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu-led coalition may lead to new elections, which it did, leading some to worry, while others note this development may have been predicted many times over as a precursor to better and much more messianic times. Again, why would we care about this? Like that they think that this is messianic related. We believe in Jesus Christ, right? We know Jesus Christ is the Messiah. We know he's going to come in the second coming. The reason why is because the way that they think, the way that they believe, will guide their actions and could bring about prophecy. So, for example, if they just if there's enough support and they decide to um, possess the Temple Mount and make changes there, obviously that's going to lead to some pretty bad things. Instantly, World War III is going to erupt, right? But most likely. Um, Also, like I've said before, I do believe the Lord is working with them and getting them in a messianic way of thinking. Why? Because the second coming is going to happen. They're expecting Messiah. Although they're not expecting Jesus Christ, they are expecting Messiah. Their minds are being prepared. And when he comes to them on the Mount of Olives and he saves them, they're going to be in that mode. They're going to be in messianic mode. So that's why it's important, even though they're expecting something that's not going to happen. Okay, so look at this. Netanyahu's most solid connection to Messiah was through Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitch Chabad leader who died in 1994. The two first met in 1984 when Netanyahu was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. Before Netanyahu returned to Israel in 1988 to join Likud, which is his political party, the Rebbe gave him advice which proved to be at least partly prophetic. Quote, "You will fight with 100 you'll fight with 119 people." End quote. Presaging the coalition troubles that are plaguing the prime minister to this day. So if you're like someone that believes this rabbi, you're like, wow, yeah, he called it. He's going to have all these issues when he's in office. Okay. Rabbi David Nachshon, a close friend of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who witnessed the dialogue, related that the Rebbe was confident that some great good would come out of Netanyahu's political trials. Quote, "It really pains me as a friend, as a brother, as a close friend, to see how people constantly spill Netanyahu's blood. But I have a surprise for you. He's going to come out of it, and he'll stand tall on God's side. He has a promise from the Rebbe, and he's going to make it through this. We've seen it happen up till now, and that's how it's going to be now as well. He will make it through this. He will continue, and I hope he'll be able to hand the keys over to Mashiach, the Messiah, and we'll have the complete and true redemption." Okay. The Lubavitch Rebbe was not the only prominent tzaddik, righteous man. Remember, Zedek is righteousness, Melchizedek, the righteousness is my king is righteousness. So the Lubavitch Rebbe was not the only prominent tzaddik with high expectations for Netanyahu. Rabbi Yitzhak Kaduri, one of the most influential Sephardic spiritual leaders of the century, who passed away in 2006 at the age of 106, met with Netanyahu in 1997 during his first term as prime minister. Rabbi Kaduri whispered a long message into the politician's ear. Rabbi Shmueli, that's the name for Samuel, by the way, Shmuel, a follower of Rabbi Kaduri, revealed that Kaduri had always maintained that Netanyahu would serve a very long time, and after his term in office, the Messiah would arrive. Before his death, Kaduri had said that he expected the Jewish Messiah to arrive soon, and that he had met him a year earlier, which is an interesting claim. In May, breaking Israel news. That's not this, is it? No, Israel National News. Okay. In May, Breaking Israel News reported the opinion of Rabbi Levi Sudri, noted the many parallels between the current prime minister and Jonathan, the son of biblical king Saul. You remember David and Jonathan were the best of friends, right? But it was David who became king. Sudri suggested that Netanyahu is serving the function of Moshiach ben Yosef, Messiah from the house of Joseph, the first half of the two-stage Messianic process. Now, I've had people ask me to talk to the rabbi about Moshiach ben Yosef, the Messiah from the house of Joseph, because we would have a special interest in that in our church, right? Hasn't it been said that save Jesus Christ himself, no one has done more for the salvation of man than Joseph Smith? And Joseph Smith is the one that's through Joseph Smith, the church was restored in these last days, right? So it's interesting that they have this idea of a Moshiach ben Yosef. And don't forget, Moshiach or Messiah, it means anointed one. So, for example, any king of Israel would have been a Moshiach because they were anointed. You're anointed when you become a king. Or the prophets, for example, Samuel and Nathan and people like that. So they have a different idea of what Mashiach is, and they're viewing the future Mashiach, like the one that's going to restore the Davidic line in kingdom, the house of David, as not like Messiah the way that we view Christ, but as like a man basically who's going to play an important role in the last days in restoring Israel and bringing about the final redemption. So that's how they view it, right? Maybe on another time I will talk to him about Moshiach ben Yosef, and he also has his website, the People's Talmud, and you can look it up there. So I'll look at that some other time. Okay, but it's interesting here that you have Rabbi Levi Sudri, who's noting parallels and suggesting that Netanyahu is Moshiach ben Yosef. Okay, and those people probably still believe that to this day. 2018 wasn't that long ago. Moshiach ben Yosef is a practical, mundane process that includes the ingathering of the exiles and building up of the land of Israel. The second stage, Moshiach ben David, Messiah from the house of David, is a miraculous process which includes the reestablishment of the Davidic dynasty and the completion of the Third Temple. Rabbi Sudri explained that as the reincarnation of Jonathan, and by the way, they do have that belief of reincarnation. I talked to Rabbi Gerfine about that. So that's something that's different from what we believe, right? But anyway, Rabbi Sudri explained that as the reincarnation of Jonathan and the manifestation of Moshiach ben Yosef, Netanyahu is paving the way for the more transcendent Moshiach ben David, who will immediately follow. Quote, "It is very clear that we see in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he is fulfilling his destiny as Mashiach ben Yosef, that is to say, the reincarnation of Jonathan," Rabbi Sudri told Breaking Israel News at the time. Quote, "The name Netanyahu is composed of the same letters as the name Jonathan," and so you can see the Hebrew letters right here. End quote. This sentiment was repeated by Rabbi Moshe ben Tov, known for his ability to perceive the past and present of people by gazing at the mezuzah on their door. A mezuzah is like a mezuzah. It's like a thing that you put on your doorpost. You see these things right here. Let's go to shopping. You can buy these things. Like you see this, it has like scriptures and stuff. This one says, May God's blessing rest upon this house and all who dwell within. May all who enter this house also be blessed." So that one's only $10. They're not very expensive. I guess there's probably more fancy ones. I kind of like that. Well, no, I like this one right here. Yeah, out of these ones that I see so far, I would probably go with this one. I like that one. Anyway, let's go back. What was he saying? Okay, so Okay, this sentiment was repeated by Rabbi Moshe ben Tov, known for his ability to perceive the past and present of people by gazing at the mezuzah on their door. So him looking at the mezuzah that you purchased, he would be able to. Sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful. He thought that he could perceive people's future by looking at that. After attaching a mezuzah at the prime minister's office, Rabbi Ben Tov made a remarkable statement to the prime minister. Quote, "It is very important that your love of Israel continue until the Moshiach comes, because you're going to stay in office and are going to meet him," Rabbi Ben Tov said to Netanyahu. "You are the one who will give him the keys to this office." Okay, so stop. So you have a few different rabbis kind of like with this idea attached with Benjamin Netanyahu, and actually telling him, this rabbi told him, you're going to be the one that gives the keys to Mashiach. So, do you think that Benjamin Netanyahu takes that seriously? I think he probably does. I think he probably does. I think that's why he's been in office for so long. We're going to look at a few facts about him. And when you think about that, if he believes these rabbis, and he believes that he's going to be the one to usher in Messiah, then would it make sense that he would want to kind of consolidate power or limit the power of the Israeli, what was it called? The High Court? Yeah, the High Court, right? Because uh, if you're going to transition from a republic, democracy, I don't know exactly how their government is classified, but if you're going from like a republic to, or like a, what, why can't I just let it go? What type of government does Israel have? The Israeli system of government is based on parliamentary democracy. Okay, so I guess that's what you would officially call it. So if you're going from this system of government to a monarchy where the Messiah is the first king of the new Davidic dynasty, do you think there's really going to be a need for the current modern government that it has, where it has like our government, where they have the three branches of government? Do you think that's necessary in a monarchy the way that they envision it? Probably not. Probably not. So maybe, and I'm not saying this for sure, but maybe that's what's going on here behind this smile. Maybe he's really happy because he thinks that he's getting ready for the new kingdom, right? And it's a process. You can't just like do it all at once. You probably have to do it in stages. Okay, so let's continue. There's some more. Perhaps the most powerful message connecting current political events to the Messiah came from the most obscure source. Almost exactly 1 year ago, a Haredi, or an ultra-Orthodox, 31-year-old Israeli woman named Talia Caroline Eliyahu was going through a spiritual crisis after giving birth. She sensed a dark presence in her home. Uh, I would guess that's most likely postpartum depression, but one night she awoke to change her baby's diaper. When she returned to sleep, she dreamt of a large chariot with many people in it, including a member of her family. She followed the chariot into a large room where many people were being beaten. In that room, she encountered her deceased grandmother, who said, "You are partly here and partly there." She also saw many holy rabbis she recognized, some alive and some already deceased. One of the rabbis she recognized was Rabbi Dov Cook, a well-known mystic from Tiberias. Quote, "When the government of Netanyahu crumbles, it is time to get ready for Mashiach," Rabbi Cook told her in the dream. Talia's vision is taken seriously in her community of Haredi Jews, even more so now that current events indicate they may have relevance. Okay. So Netanyahu probably isn't just like some ordinary prime minister. He's not just like a run of the mill prime minister. It seems like various parties have attached deep religious significance to him and his time in office. Okay, so now let's look at uh, let's look at this website. This is Chosen People Ministries. This is a Messianic Jewish website. So these are Jews that have accepted Christ as the Messiah, although they're part of the Messianic Jewish movement, which is these Jews that have converted to Christianity, but they still retain a lot of their Jewish traditions and stuff. We've talked about them. I have them on my timeline here because I think that this is significant when we're talking about the time of the Gentiles and the gospel going forth among the Jews. Because, and I'm not going to say this for sure, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I think it could look like this. In column M, at the very far right, this movement, which used to be called, or is kind of like the predecessor to it, was the Hebrew Christian movement. Interestingly enough, it began. Let's go back in time here. At the time of Joseph Smith. Okay, Joseph Smith was born December 23rd, 1805. Okay, 4 years later, you have the London Society for Promoting Christianity amongst the Jews, and this is the approximate beginning of the Hebrew Christian movement. And it was 11 years before the first vision. And then, 4 years after that, you have the first identifiable congregation made up exclusively of Jews who had converted to Christianity. Beni Abraham, established in the United Kingdom 7 years before the first vision. So essentially, you have this movement, the likes of which the world hasn't seen that I know of, that takes place, that comes up, that begins during the life of Joseph Smith, probably the true Mashiach ben Yosef, right? So we're looking at one of these congregations, and on their website they have this article that says that's called Netanyahu's Re-election and is Israel's Messianic community, meaning the Messianic Jews. On November 1st, 2022, Israel held its fifth election in less than 4 years. Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party gathered 31 seats, allowing the Likud to form a coalition government of 64 seats in the 120-seat Knesset. Netanyahu is a controversial figure. He enjoys the ardent support of many who sometimes refer to him by the affectionate name Bibi. At the same time, he has equally ardent opponents. Context for the election. Initial reactions to the election. The most recent election results will shape the country, including the ever-growing Messianic community. So they're interested in this because this is going to affect them, and I'm going to show you why. Netanyahu will form the country's most right-wing government, as many of the other parties making up his 64-seat coalition are ultra-Orthodox, 18 seats. So I don't know how you determine that. I'll take Chosen People's word for it, that this will be the most right-wing government. Okay? Whenever you go to any extreme, left, right, up, down, whatever, interesting things happen, right? Usually things work out best when they're balanced, when there's communication, when there's compromise, when there's, everything like that. But when you start going to a certain extreme, and I'm not, this is just how I view things. That's when things can go kind of crazy, right? We've seen that in history many times. We've seen revolutions. We've seen different forms of government. Okay. So anyway, according to Chosen People, the most right-wing government. Okay. Skipping on down, what led to the new elections? To better understand this election, however, we must consider the broader view of Netanyahu's role in Israeli politics. His role is immense. Netanyahu has served Israel's government longer than anyone else in history. Now, does this ring any bells? Mostly recently, we've been talking about these people that are the longest living of their kind. So, for example, we have the last king of Greece. We have the longest living pope of all time that passed away on December 31st of 2022. Right. We had Jiang Zemin, who passed away. He was the longest living president of China. So these are longest living people, but I would still put this in the same category when you have somebody that was in power the longest over their nation. So Netanyahu is, I would say that he's in this category. Like if he were to pass away or something, I would put that down here, and I would add him to this series of people. You know, we had Queen Elizabeth II, who was the longest reigning British monarch. I would put him in the same class of people. So we're looking at somebody that's part of this series of people, even though he's still living. Okay, so that's important to note. Netanyahu has served Israel's government longer than anyone else in history, and you have to wonder if maybe that has to do with what those rabbis said. Maybe, you know, he had extra clout because of that, and people took it seriously, and so it was easier for him to get into office. His upcoming term as prime minister marks his third time in office. He previously held the role from 1996 to 1999, which that's interesting because those were the last years before the turn of the millennium. And 2009 to 2021. Israel does not have term limits for the prime minister. Some Israelis have called for one, especially considering Netanyahu's previous unprecedented 12-year term. And that was something that stood out to me when we were looking at the last two prime ministers, Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. The fact that Benjamin Netanyahu had served 12, but now he's gone beyond that. He held several prominent positions in Israel's public life, including ambassador to the United Nations and minister of finance. Netanyahu's government began to dissolve in 2019 when he could no longer hold on to a coalition providing a majority of Knesset seats. A series of 4 elections culminated in a new coalition under Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett, who was prime minister until June 2022. At that time, this coalition could no longer last and dissolved, triggering yet another election cycle. Okay. I better read this. Why some like Netanyahu. He's popular among the ultra-Orthodox. Why? Okay. In the November 2022 election, Netanyahu garnered support from the ultra-right-wing parties made up primarily of the very Orthodox. This most religious segment of Israel's Jewish community seeks to maintain their unique status within the country. For instance, the ultra-Orthodox are exempt from military service, which Israel generally requires of all citizens. This exemption allows ultra-Orthodox young men to continue their religious studies. Similarly, the ultra-Orthodox tend to oppose government oversight of their schools. Ultra-Orthodox yeshivas, which is the school that you go to, especially for boys, strongly emphasizes the study of the Talmud. Many, both in Israel and around the world, have criticized these schools for failing to provide children with basic language and math skills. Critics call on the government to do more to ensure ultra-Orthodox schools offer basic education. Many ultra-Orthodox see Netanyahu as an ally to help the community maintain their unique status and independence. He has, for instance, agreed to allow their schools not to teach secular subjects. And that's not the only thing. The men receive government stipends because the way it works among the ultra-Orthodox is the men are supposed to study Torah, all day. That is their job, is the study of Torah, the Talmud, Jewish teachings, and then the women are the ones that go out and work. And so the government gives them a stipend for going to these yeshivas. Okay, so they want to preserve these benefits, not having to be in the military, and freedom over their schools and stipends and so on and so forth. Okay, everyone knows that he's popular for security, the security of Israel. He's more of like a hawk, right? Okay, now his legal trouble. The incoming coalition will be the most right-leaning in Israel's history. This term, right-wing, is used quite differently than in the United States. There are similarities. However, the term usually describes the political aspirations and policies of the ultra-religious within Israel when it comes to the army, the role of women, the role of woman, attitudes toward Palestinians, the control of Jewish immigration from other parts of the world who wish to become Israeli citizens. This process is often called by the Hebrew term aliyah, which means to go up. Right? We've talked about aliyah a bunch. I've done interviews with a couple of Jews now that have taken advantage of this. If you go to my playlist of special guests, I spoke to Elie Michel. He was a rabbi here in the United States in New Jersey, and at the age of 40, he made Aliyah to Israel. He works with Israel's 365, and he's the one that got me set up with Rabbi Gerfein, and Rabbi Gerfein is another one that made Aliyah, but that was like 50 years ago. And then Samantha Siegel, I can't remember what age she said she was, but I think she was like in her teens when she made Aliyah to Israel from Illinois. I think those are the only ones I've spoken to. The other, we had him. I can't remember his name. I think it was Nathan. He is an Israeli, but he did not make Aliyah. Oh yeah, Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz. He is the one that writes most of these articles that we read in Israel 365. He's like over the biblical news. He kind of writes most of the articles in that portion of the website. So he made Aliyah. Anyway, okay, so look at this. Look at this. Okay, the coalition's controversial proposals. Okay, they have even contested the nation's definition of Jewish for Aliyah purposes. Now, a person must have at least one Jewish grandparent. Now, a person must have at least one Jewish grandparent. They want to require at least one Jewish parent. Some worry, including religious Zionism, will forever alter Israel's democracy. Another controversial point Netanyahu's coalition has called for is allowing the Knesset to veto Supreme Court decisions. And this is basically what we're talking about right now, this article. I'm talking about bulldozing the Declaration of Independence. Okay. And then critics fear this move will strip the court of its power and cause the court to come under more control by the ultra-religious who do not like secular courts. And like I said, they could view this as like a transitionary stage, transforming Israel's government in preparation for Messiah. That's what I read between the lines when I look at these other articles. Let's continue. There's more. There's more. Okay, perspective of Israel's Messianic community, the Messianic Jews, the Christians, okay, that are Jewish. The Israeli Messianic community is divided in their perception of Netanyahu. Israel's government is a multi-party system, so politics is not as polarized between two major groups the way American politics is between Democrats and Republicans. Rather, Israelis often vote for several different parties depending on what issues they most care about in each election season. One issue especially important for Messianic Israelis is immigration. The law of return allows anyone with at least one Jewish grandparent to move to Israel as a citizen, aliyah. In everyday practice, the ultra-religious consider Jewish followers of Jesus as no longer Jewish. and thus ineligible for Aliyah. Recent court cases have made it more difficult for Messianic Jewish people to migrate to Israel. Like many other Israelis, Jewish believers in the land worry this change will prevent friends and family members from making Aliyah. Israel's Messianic community also shares the country's common concern about the ultra-Orthodox. This deeply religious segment of the population does not join the military, and few hold jobs outside the ultra-Orthodox community. Secular Israelis, the majority of Israel's population, have long resented the benefits the government extends to the ultra-Orthodox. The swing to the hard right could impact the Messianic community, as the ultra-Orthodox view Messianic Israelis as no longer Jewish and therefore traitors. So, and by the way, and this is not anything against the Orthodox. Remember, so this is how it goes. Basically, the way that Judaism is divided is, you, at least here in America, they have different names in Israel, but you have the Reform, which are basically the very, like, the left-leaning, almost barely even Jewish. They're very loose with their interpretations of the Torah, the rest of the Tanakh, which is the Old Testament, and the Talmud and stuff like that. They tend to see things as symbolic rather than literal, very much like the community of Christ, right, is to our church. And then one step up from that, one more step toward the right, or whatever you want to call it, is the conservatives, but they're still kind of a far cry from Orthodox, but they are more traditional than the Reform, right? And then you move on to Orthodox, and that's mostly who I've been talking to in these interviews. Like, for example, Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz, and then Elie Michel, and then Rabbi Gerfine. They're all Orthodox, but within the Orthodox, you have like a couple more divisions. You have the Haredim and the Hasidim, or the Haredis and the Hasidic Jews, and they're like, even that's why they're called ultra Orthodox. And so I'm assuming, well, and it says it here, it's the ultra Orthodox. They're the ones that are kind of like against the Messianic Jews, not so much like just the regular Orthodox, I don't think. When the BYU Jerusalem Center was proposed and when it was being constructed, it was them, the ultra Orthodox, that like protested against it. They even had like signs, like picket signs, and they're really upset about it. In fact, let me see if I can find a picture of that really quick. BYU Jerusalem Center protest. Maybe under here. I remember seeing this recently. Someone had a picture of it. Oh yeah, look, here's one right here. This is an LDS Living, and so you have some ultra Orthodox right here that are right here. It says Orthodox Jews, but I wouldn't lump them all together. I think there was somewhere else that specified that it was ultra Orthodox. So probably Haredim and Hasidim that were trying to stop the BYU Jerusalem Center. And on this sign, you see, Jeffrey, stop your missionary work before we retaliate. You can't fool us, you know. So you see how that went. Okay. Let's see. Just a couple more things. So now we're done with that. Here's another thing. This is from PBS. El Arad, quote unquote, Messianic Netanyahu. Here's just another account of the fact that he really is, like viewed this way, and probably views himself this way. Look what he says. He says, the prime minister has a messianic notion of himself as a person called to save the Jewish people from this new Holocaust, end quote. This assessment comes from Eyal Arad, a top Israeli political strategist who was an advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu beginning in 1984. Arad traces this worldview back to Netanyahu's father, Ben Zion, a historian who specialized in the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Quote, the outlook of Netanyahu that is coming from his father is that there will always be a hostile world that would not care for the security and welfare of the Jewish nation. And one thing that we should do is do it ourselves and take our destiny, so to speak, in our own hands and never trust the outside world to protect us because it won't, end quote. So you can see that Netanyahu is probably in the camp of not so much waiting for the world to become more peaceful and then peacefully getting the Arabs and Muslims on their side and then taking down the Dome of the Rock and building up the temple. It seems like he's probably more on the side of like, we got to do it ourselves. Like, we got to make prophecy happen. I am, according to the rabbis I've talked to, I am Messiah ben Yosef. I'm sure he takes that seriously. Now look at this. This is Israel Today. Okay, now I don't have a membership, so we can only read a part of this. Netanyahu's government and the kingdom of Israel. Religious Zionists who today hold the reins of power say a third temple must be built and Israel must reclaim the promised land in preparation for Messiah. And Netanyahu, if you follow the news, you know he's been kind of notorious for allowing for settlements, Israeli settlements in the West Bank and probably the Golan Heights and places like that. The Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Oh, by the way, this is from this month. This is from the 17th of this month. So the Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, today consists of political parties and members of the Knesset who hold the belief that Israel is working toward the coming of the Messiah and the revival of the kingdom of Israel. So Israel Today, they're just like outright just calling it out, right? And of course, the ultra Orthodox Jews are striving for that. Of course they are. So you have a guy that probably thinks that he's Mashiach ben Yosef, and he's being supported by ultra Orthodox that are pushing for this to happen. So they are called religious Zionists, part of a growing stream of Judaism who are committed to settling the whole land of Israel, including Judea and Samaria, in preparation for the Messiah and the restoration of his kingdom in Israel. If this sounds like the first Messianic Jewish disciples of Jesus who were concerned about the restoration of the kingdom of Israel in Acts 1:6, it is. Religious Zionists hold the key positions in the government, and they aim to turn Israel back toward a more Torah-based society. Itamar Ben-Gvir is Minister of National Security. And by the way, that guy, he is a character. He is a character. In fact, he recently caused a stir by visiting the Temple Mount, and they were not happy about that. Okay, and Bezalel Smotrich is Minister of Finance and in charge of settlements in Judea and Samaria. Unlike most traditional Orthodox Jews, these Torah-based Zionists prioritize settling the whole ... and then I don't have a membership. Boy, I wish I could read the rest of this. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's read this again. Barely 7 weeks after the coalition was sworn in, it easily secured Knesset approval over Monday, Tuesday, for the first reading of a law that would grant in near absolute power over all three branches of Israel's governance. Now, I don't have anything else highlighted from here, so this is going to be a little bit spotty. It would have taken forever to prepare this video if I had done that, so I'm hoping this will work out. With a vote of 63 to 47 in the 120-seat parliament, it blitzed through the first reading of a bill that gives the governing majority control of the panel that selects Israel's judges. Okay, so yeah, because normally, like in our country, in the United States, it's how's it go? You have a Supreme Court justice, or you have someone that's nominated to become a Supreme Court justice. I believe it's the president. The president is the one that nominates them, but then Congress has to confirm them. So in this, compare that to this. The governing majority control of the panel that selects Israel's judges. In doing so, It disregarded a plea from President Isaac Herzog, and I don't know who that is. I should have looked him up. Is an Israeli politician who has been serving as the 11th president of Israel since 2021. He is the first president to be born in Israel after its declaration of independence. Okay, so this is one of those. I don't really understand these different countries. Like, I know that in Russia they have the president and the prime minister. I just whatever. It's beyond me. I don't really care. But okay, so that's who he is. Okay, so he's the president of Israel, but really it's the prime minister. From my understanding, that is like the equivalent of our president in the United States. In doing so, it disregarded a plea from President Isaac Herzog to pause the legislative process and look instead at his proposals for genuine judicial reform, and open a dialogue with the opposition, and heed the vast ongoing public protest against what one of its own members of the Knesset, Likud's intemperate David Amsalem, let slip last week is, of course, a revolution in the way Israel is governed. That's a pretty strong word, a revolution. And there's other parts. There's other articles here that actually are calling it like a coup. Not so much a coup of the Benjamin Netanyahu, but a faction of the government itself taking even more control for itself. Okay, so today there will be votes, and tomorrow I hope the path will be open to dialogue, claimed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier Monday, insisting there would be, quote unquote, plenty of time for debate and hopefully agreement before the second and third readings required for a bill to become law. But in a spontaneous response to an opposition MK's speech during the debate preceding the vote, Netanyahu's justice minister indicated that the prime minister was being disingenuous. Yariv Levin announced that he intends to get his entire package of proposals through all three readings and onto the law books before the Knesset breaks for Passover 6 weeks from now. So he's saying, nope, he's trying to get it all done, all of it done before Passover. In a long, bitter speech just before the vote, in which he also hinted at a desire for changes to come in academia and the media, Levine continued the coalition's doublespeak, saying, quote unquote, I stretch out my hand for some substantive dialogue with the opposition, in that he is convinced, quote, we can reach understandings, but also that, quote, nothing will deter me from doing the right thing, instituting a deep and necessary reform of the Israeli judicial system without delay, end quote. Unveiled less than a week after his right, far right, and ultra-Orthodox coalition took office, Levine's package goes beyond ensuring that the coalition chooses the judges. It also near completely neuters the High Court's capacity to strike down laws and government decisions, no matter how outrageous, and enables the coalition to generally re-legislate with a simple Knesset majority laws that are somehow struck down. So that's like even more serious. That's just another way of saying that basically whoever's in the majority, they can basically do what they want. And isn't that what you want to do as Messiah ben Yosef or Mashiach ben Yosef? You want to get things prepared for Mashiach ben David. Transition from this, what did we call it again? Parliamentary democracy. Transition it from that to a monarchy. Yikes. And what are some of these decisions that could be so outrageous? What could they be? If this goes through, and if he has a mission to perform, what could some of those outrageous decisions be that the pesky High Court could strike down? Could it be things having to do with the Temple Mount? Could it be things having to do with uh, quote unquote Palestinian lands. I mean, the I I would see this as generally opening the door toward some pretty serious situations. I could see this as opening the door to the war of Gog and Magog, because if they do this and they succeed, and then they start doing like really inflammatory things, well, that could spark World War III, or if not World War, I mean, whatever you want to call it, the war of Gog and Magog, and the Battle of Armageddon, and then finally the siege on Jerusalem. You can see how that could happen, right? You can see the Arab world, the Muslim world getting really upset about things that Israel's doing. They're being more daring with their moves. And so they're like, okay, no, we're going to stop that. And then you have an invasion of the country. So I don't know if we're like seeing like the beginnings of this. And my question is, why haven't they done it until now? That would probably require a lot more knowledge of Israeli politics and Israeli political history. But why now? Why didn't he do this back when he was in power the last couple times? I don't know. Let's continue. All this in a country with no other brakes on abuse by the political leadership. No constitution, no Bill of Rights, no second parliamentary chamber. Oh yeah, because they don't have. Yeah, because most countries, I believe, most countries have like a constitutional form of government, and it's patterned after the United States. And the parliament or the Congress or the legislative branch has two houses. So in the United States, we have the House of Representatives, and then you have the Senate. And so those two have to work together within that branch. First, a bill goes through one, and once it's approved through one, then it's sent to the second, and then the second one has to accept it. And sometimes they send it back and they want to make changes and stuff like that. But I guess Israel doesn't have a second chamber. According to this, these are things I didn't really know. In fact, let's see. The Israeli system of government is based on parliamentary democracy. The Prime Minister of Israel is the head of government and leader of a multi party system. Executive power is exercised by the government, also known as the cabinet. Legislative power is vested in the Knesset. The judiciary is independent of the executive and the legislature. The political system of the State of Israel and its main principles are set out in 11 basic laws. Israel does not have a written constitution. So that's why in this article it's talking about Netanyahu's judicial reform threatens to bulldoze the Declaration of Independence, because that's probably where their laws, their political theory comes from. Otherwise, it would say threatens to bulldoze the Constitution. So okay. So with everything that he wants to do, it says here, all this in a country with no other brakes on abuse by the political leadership. No constitution, no Bill of Rights, no secondary parliamentary chamber, and a Knesset with zero capacity to resist any legislation advanced by a like-minded coalition. As Monday night's vote underlined. The practical consequence that almost all basic rights of Israelis will be subject to the whims of the political party of the day, with the High Court prevented from acting, as it has to date, as the last resort constraint, was made explicit earlier Monday during the latest of numerous tempestuous meetings of the Knesset's Constitution, Law, and Justice Committee. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Chaired by Simcha Rothman of the coalition's far-right religious Zionism party, it was working on the next pieces of legislation, including an amendment stipulating the radically reduced circumstances in which the High Court of Justice will be able to intervene in legislation. Under the terms of this amendment, warned the committee's hapless legal advisor, Ger Bly, who has been relentlessly maligned by Rothman, there would be, quote, no constitutional protection for basic rights, end quote, like equality, freedom of speech, the right to due process in legal proceedings, freedom of association, and the right to religious liberty. Just as Netanyahu and Levine have shrugged off general and specific concerns that their remaking of Israel's governance marks a descent into a tyranny of the elected majority, Rothman was entirely unfazed. Quote, I don't think that the legislation excludes the possibility that the High Court can review a case of the violation of freedom of expression, he declared blithely. Um, Closer to the abyss, as the coalition bulldozes its legislation through the parliament, it effortlessly dominates Israel's internal climate is heating up to the point where the head of the Shin Bet security agency is said to have told Netanyahu, Levine, opposition leader Yair Lapid, and others in the last few days of, quote, growing potential for violence and escalation, end quote, and urged them to help lower the flames. Herzog, the president, warned last week that Israel is, quote, marching into the abyss and is on the brink of a constitutional and societal collapse. Hopefully that is just hyperbole, but I'm not so sure. Let's skip down a little bit. Just before the vote, Gantz went to the Knesset podium and issued a last plea for dialogue, urging the coalition to halt the legislative process and begin substantive talks there and then. Quote, it's what the public wants, he argued. But the coalition rejects that assertion. After all, it decisively won the election last November. So no, it's not what the public wants, would be their argument. And all its component parties are directly invested in neutering the judiciary, whether it is to ensure ultra-Orthodox males can get boosted government funding for full-time Torah study while evading the draft, or to enable far-reaching changes in Israeli policy in the West Bank, or to ensure that no, not everybody in Israel is equal before the law. Our Declaration of Independence promises that the State of Israel, quote, will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture, end quote. As of today, those foundational commitments and guarantees are under direct and tangible threat from the very government charged with upholding them. So that's from the Times of Israel. I mean, you could see how if this was happening in the United States, if essentially the president and the Congress, the majority party, if they were looking to limit the power of the Supreme Court and make it easier to pass legislation without Supreme Court interference, because the Supreme Court is it's all supposed to be a system of checks and balances, right? That's why the government is divided into three, so that you have these different functions and none of them have just complete reign. So you have these other branches of government that put a check on the other one's power. So if you're trying to reduce the power or the ability to check on one branch of government, that's kind of a problem. That kind of leads toward toward tyranny. And I'm not trying to be political here. I'm just talking about just the way government works in general. Okay. Here's another article. History will judge you. Opposition lashes government for advancing judicial bill. Lapid. So he was the former prime minister right before Netanyahu. Lapid slams coalition for tearing apart the nation with bill that would see political majority choose judges. Gantz decries Black Day for democracy. Netanyahu hails Great Day. Okay, I'm probably not going to read that. Sorry. This is also the Times of Israel. In highly unusual move, major U.S. Jewish group decries proposed judicial overhaul. Jewish Federations, a massive umbrella group, departs from usual practice of being mum on Israeli politics, warns against dramatic proposal to let Knesset override High Court. So you have this group that's chiming in. Okay, now we're with Israel 365. Israeli minister tells U.S. envoy to mind his business on judicial reforms. Let's read a little bit about this. Israeli Diaspora Affairs Minister Amichai Kikli rebuked U.S. Ambassador Tom Nides on Sunday after the American envoy jumped into the debate over Jerusalem's proposed judicial reform package. Quote, I say to the American ambassador, slam the brakes on yourself and mind your own business. End quote, said Kikli regarding Nides' call for the Israeli government to modify its initiative. Quote, you're not the sovereign here. We'd be happy to debate with you international or security affairs, but respect our democracy, he added. The relationship with the United States is very important, but this intervention by Nides is very problematic, said Kikli. Kikli's remarks came after Nides told former Obama administration official David Axelrod during a podcast interview that the Biden administration was demanding that that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pump the brakes on the judicial reforms. We're telling the Prime Minister, as I tell my kids, pump the brakes, slow down, try to get a consensus, bring the parties together, said Nides. While the United States was not going to dictate, quote unquote, to Israel how to conduct its internal affairs, Nides qualified that, quote, the one thing that binds our countries together is a sense of democracy. Okay, and then there's more. I'm not going to read more from that. And then you have Blinken calls Abbas Netanyahu ahead of UN showdown over Israeli housing plans. So, yeah, like I was saying before, this is like a thing that Netanyahu would like to continue to do. I don't care to get into that whole debate or whatever, but what I will say is that the more that Israel does that, the more likely the Arabs, the Muslims, the Palestinians are going to want to fight back, and it kind of stokes flames, right? And I think they're trying to do it in a slow way, and the Palestinians kind of see what they're doing and they're not happy about it because they want that land to be their state. If there ever becomes a Palestinian state, it's like, well, you keep building on our land, and then when it comes down to it, you're going to want to keep that land that has been built on, and we're going to have less land. So anyway, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with both Palestinian Authority head Mahmoud Abbas and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Saturday ahead of a anticipated showdown at the United Nations Security Council over Jerusalem's assertion of its rights in Judea and Samaria. Blinken reaffirmed to both leaders Washington's, quote, commitment to a negotiated two-state solution in opposition to policies that endanger its viability. Blinken also underscored the urgent need for Israelis and Palestinians to take steps that restore calm, and the Biden administration's strong opposition to unilateral measures that could further escalate tensions. I mean, how long are we going to talk about, the two-state thing? And it's like if It's like if it was viable, it probably would have already happened by now. This is one of those things like what's happening with Ukraine and Russia right now. It's like, what is the way out of this? Is there a way out of this? I don't know. How does this end? Okay, Times of Israel. Majority of Israelis opposes key planks of judicial overhaul plan, survey finds. And there's been some protests. And I was actually talking to Troy from the Last Dispensation channel just recently. We're actually doing another interview with Hannah Stoddard. It's gonna be published on Monday, this next Monday. But he was like, yeah, there's something going on in Israel right now. There's like protests and stuff. And I was like, what? I haven't heard anything. Well, I think this is what he's talking about. So far, it doesn't look too crazy. This doesn't look all too like violent or anything. Israelis hold signs and wave the Israeli flag as they walk in the streets of Tel Aviv, protesting the government's planned judicial overhaul. A majority of Israelis oppose the government's push to subvert the judiciary, including a substantial minority of voters who supported coalition parties, according to a survey released on Tuesday. The poll by the Israel Democracy Institute found that 66% of Israelis believe the High Court should have the power to strike down laws that are incompatible with the quasi-constitutional basic laws, a central tenet of the government's judicial plan. Okay, so there's that. This is in Haaretz. Netanyahu must prove that he can compromise, but he's the weakest link in his own government. And you can't see the whole article here. You have to pay, but basically it's like, well, I mean, I don't think he's going to compromise. I think they know that they can do this, so they're just going to do it. And then what complicates matters is everything that we know about Benjamin Netanyahu and how he seems to see himself, or how rabbis of the ultra-Orthodox see him. Of course, we're just depending on this information. I mean, I can't say exactly what he's thinking. Maybe some of this stuff are lies, rumors. I mean, probably not. I mean, you have these news companies that are... It seems like that really is the case. Yeah, I mean, you have PBS, you have 7 Israel National News, you have Israel 365, you have Israel Today. They're all saying it. So that's why the situation is probably a little bit concerning. And just another thing that's going to make this year all the more interesting. So I should probably go back to my timeline and add when he became prime minister again, because that may be a very historic date, more historic than what we now realize. Maybe the beginning of the end. I don't know. And when I say the end, I mean just up till the second coming, when Christ comes to the Jews. Okay, well, that's going to be it for... oh, geez. Sorry. That's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.